Hi, this is Paul, and today I'm sure John will post this on his channel too, probably.
Yeah.
But John, I was going to say John Verdonk. John Vervaeke and I are going to have another conversation. I posted a video a week or two ago, and John made a comment, said, "Oh, let's talk about some of this stuff." And I'm sure that there'll be no shortage of things for John and I to talk about.
Yeah.
And I was just mentioning that when I saw that little snippet of what you had done with Rafe about non-theism, and I was talking to a Roman Catholic scholar about doing a conversation about that Bishop Barron cosmic skeptic conversation. I thought, wow, some of this non-theism is very interesting in terms of, let's say, classical theism versus non-theism. And so
and I thought the video was very good. And I thought some of the critique of some of the stuff the cosmic skeptic was saying was good. You had both criticisms, and you also pointed out this is a strong argument. This argument needs to be responded to. I thought that was excellent. Now, for me also, I've just been reading. I'm reading and purchased a bunch. This book, for example, Mystical Monotheism: A Study in Ancient Platonic Theology, by John Peter Kenny, is having a deep impact on the fact that what I thought was classical theism isn't perhaps best called classical theism. This book, The Unknown God, Negative Theology in the Platonic Tradition, Plato to Erigena, by Diedre Carabine, which is, and then Bishop Barron, he'd love that I've got this new book, The World is God's Icon, Creator and Creation in the Platonic Thought of Thomas Aquinas. It's all about participation. And then Participation in God, A Study in Christian Doctrine and Metaphysics. So I've been trying to be responsible to, that I need a more refined and nuanced way of talking about non-theism in contrast to theism. I even proposed in the comment that I might need a distinction between what we might call common theism, the kind of post-enlightenment theism that that was bounced off and bounced with deism and stuff like that, and classical theism, in which a lot of notions that I think are found within the non-theistic religions also get prominent place within what turns out to be frequently Orthodox Christianity. If Thomas Aquinas isn't Orthodox, I'm not quite sure who is. But of course, some of these people are also considered heretics, Erigena, for example. Right. So that stuff sits right, for me, and I mean this properly, it sits right on the boundary of Christianity. Do you know what I mean? What's inside and outside, while still going to the core in a lot of ways. And again, because Augustine and Dionysius, like, these are pretty orthodox sources for Western Christianity, Eastern Christianity. Anyways, this is a long rambling way of me saying I want to enter into dialogue about this, because I think my own thinking needs refinement on this, and I guess I'll state a kind of what I want to do. I want to do that, and I want to enter into your excellent discussion around that. But I have a goal that you might not have, because part of my allegiance to the idea of non-theism is I want to be able to talk about, in fact, I'll make it more personal. When I left Christianity, and I found Platonism and Neoplatonism, I found Buddhism, and I found Taoism, and they did things for me, and they continue to do things for me. The best analogy I can have is they're some of my best friends, and I have a tremendous loyalty to them. And I won't sort of go into any position that requires me to take up a kind of disloyalty to them or a denigration of what they have done or continue to do for me. And part of my allegiance to non-theism, and I don't think my situation is in any way, unique or special. I think there's lots of people in that boat. And so part of what I want to do with the non-theism is be able to talk about the sacred in a way that maintains that loyalty to Neoplatonism, to Buddhism and Taoism. Now, of course, one of the advantages is Neoplatonism also has a long history with Christianity, which makes such a dialogue possible. So I just wanted to put some of my cards on the table of what I'm looking for, but and one of the goals that I have in mind.
Well, and I'll put some of my cards on the table too. I mean, when I first started making videos, at least these monologue videos, not just the Freddie and Paul show, but and I didn't even have the conceptual framework to know why I was feeling that the world had changed. And Ascension Day, of course, was for me a big puzzle, because Jesus goes up. Okay. But obviously the world has changed dramatically since Galileo.
Yes.
The heavens don't start at the moon.
Yeah.
And so I realized that I continue for my occupation to try to contextualize the Bible to a 21st century group of people whose world is very different from the one within the Bible.
Mhm.
That led me to, and I saw with Jordan's work, somebody, at least I intuitively had a sense that there's something going on here, that he's playing around with modernity, and he's trying to bring old things in. And so that was interesting. But then when I listened to him talk to Sam Harris, it became very clear that the world that Sam Harris was living in and the world that Jordan Peterson was living in terms of, you can't almost even know what God was, what they meant by this word God,
Yes,
between Sam
yes.
Harris and Jordan Peterson were very different things. And some of the stuff that I had heard out of Jordan in that conversation with Sam Harris reminded me of some of the earliest Reformation confessions and how they talked about God.
Mhm.
And as a minister, so those are my confessional statements within the Christian Reformed Church. And then I would listen to just regular people share their experience, characterize God, relate to God. And there was a big difference. And that's sort of where I came up with God number one and God number two, because
Yes,
they were
that's
sort of
good.
buckets and
Yeah.
empty placeholders for me to sort of compare and contrast. And then as I listened to your stuff, I mean, you began to give me more categories to work with, like a two worlds mythology,
Mhm.
and the agent arena relationship. I had
Yeah.
already had general revelation and natural revelation. I had already had immanence and transcendence. And so you had all these dualities that were sort of floating on out there.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I had never, despite having had obviously courses in theology in seminary and had read plenty of books on theology, I probably hadn't taken a step back and done some more classical thinking about what we mean by this word, because the
Yep.
word was very much defined by Christian practice, the Christian
Mhm.
community. And of course, everything that we're reading from the ancient world is in many ways, then framed by the contemporary stuff. And so you don't really
Yeah.
break that. And then it wasn't until, I had the God number one, God number two thing going, and then reading this book by Brett Sockold, Transubstantiation, that my eyes began to be open about, and then reading this book by a Hebrew scholar, Ezekiel Kaufman, who
Mhm.
he asked some questions that I had never thought of. I've got a seminary education, I'm not really a classicist. Why isn't there in the Bible a mythology about the beginnings of God?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so he basically works on those kinds of things. And so then the meta divine realm, and how the Hebrews sort of replaced the meta divine realm with their God, and how that then works with some of these categories. And actually this week I'm preaching on Acts 17 with Paul on Mars Hill, and
Oh.
now seeing that passage very much through Kaufman's categories, and this conversation that you have brought to me in terms of, because when you talk about non-theism, what that does is help me sort of, I don't want to say deconstruct, because that leads us down a different road, but sort of help me try to see the Hebrew scriptures,
Mhm.
the history of the church. What on earth do we mean by this word? And, with that little clip between you and Rafe, it was quite clear that your non-theism helps get you out of this impasse. that we're
Yeah.
currently in.
That's the intent. I want to make it clear to people who are watching that people that I would call atheists have now started adopting for themselves the term non-theism, which is really problematic because we need a term other than atheist for what I'm trying to talk about. And traditionally that term has been non-theism. Like Buddhists and Taoists will describe their view as a non-theistic view, and describing it as atheism is to fundamentally misrepresented in important ways to my mind. So I just want to warn people that there are books out there that are now using the word non-theism where we, until very recently, we would have used the word atheism. So, and that's an odd and interesting trend, and I want to try and figure out what's going on there as well. Why that shift, and what is it they're trying to do? Part of it is that they're trying to say that it's not a position, it's just the denial of another position. And I think that's a very problematic thing to say. So at some point, maybe I could lay out what I mean by non-theism.
Yeah, please do.
Just to be clear. And like I said, I'm really open to negotiating who the contrast class is. So I right, I really am. And so what I was trying to do with non-theism was to try and get at the shared presuppositions that I found within the current debate. So that's part of the stipulation, the current set of people who self-designate as theists and the people who self-designate as atheists and who get sort of center stage in social media, the public domain. Now, of course, I got to qualify that because as I've come to know Bishop Barron, he doesn't cleanly fall into some of the categories I was using. So again, that's part of why I want to talk to you about this. But how I posed it was, what are the shared presuppositions between the common theists and the common atheists, if I can put it that way? And I'm trying not to use common in an insulting way. I'm just trying to just designate that group. And this is, of course, a very prominent thing. And what I was saying is that the non-theist argues that the theist and the atheist agree on an important set of presuppositions that frame our relationship to the transformative power of sacredness. And they do that by taking, I make a distinction between sacredness and the sacred, and maybe we can talk about that at some point. And that for me and other people like Rafe, who I'm talking to, we want to reject the framework, the shared set of presupposition. The basic idea is the theist says yes to all of them, and the atheist says no to all of them. And the non-theist says, this is a Wittgensteinian move. This is like asking what time is it on the sun, and you've got people disagreeing about what time it is on the sun without realizing that they're framing that exactly the wrong way. It doesn't make any sense to ask that question, what time is it on the sun, right? And what you have to do is see that the presuppositions are inappropriate to the phenomena. That was one of Wittgenstein's continual moves. Realize that's the bewitchment of language, right? That the presuppositions that go into your problem formulation, your question generation, are sometimes the problem. And we need a kind of insight to break out of them. And so the non-theist is trying to break out of this and says, and then is recommending that breaking out of that framework is actually existentially, psycho-existentially important, because it allows and affords people to come into a more vital and living relationship to sacredness. And that's the main proposal of non-theism. And the idea is that aligns with non-theistic traditions within the West, like the Platonic, Neoplatonic tradition, and right religions that often frequently self-designate as non-theist, like Buddhism and Taoism. So that's what I'm trying to mean by this term.
I was fascinated by the transformative power of sacredness.
Yes.
Can you flesh that out a little bit more?
Yes. So I was just talking to Jim Rudd about this morning. So this is something I'm thinking about a lot today. So first of all, I make a distinction, and before anybody jumps on me, I can point within the tradition, the Christian tradition, to say this distinction has already been made. And I think Schleiermacher was attempting to make it. he was trying to get when we're talking about sacredness, is we're talking about a psycho existential, and there isn't a single noun here I want to put after the adjective. It's something like experience, realization, transformation. People have these experiences, realizations, transformations that strike them as importantly profound and comprehensive. They don't have to be sudden, and that these and denying that these experiences occur is just false. I mean, 40% of the population has them regardless of religious affiliation. Denying that they have the real potential to transform identities and lives is also just false. And so, and Schleiermacher tried to say, when he's defending religion, he tried to say, put aside the metaphysics, let's talk about, this sense of dependence, right? And he tried to shift it onto what I would call sacredness. And again, there isn't one word to cover it. And so I'm linking these three words together: experience, realization, transformation. And the idea here is that people have these experiences, realizations, transformations, and I want to talk about that with this word sacredness. That's what I'm trying to use, and acknowledge the reality of this and the real value of it to human lives, both individually and collectively, and that this is, of course, I was going to mention this at some point, to my mind, coming into having a proper framework by which people can come into right relationship with sacredness is integral to addressing the meaning crisis. Now, there's another term, which is the sacred, and I'll try to use these terms consistently, but even in the video episode, I slip. The sacred is some kind of metaphysical ontological proposal as to what is the cause of sacredness, right? The reason why sacredness happened was because of X, right? And of course, there's lots of variation on what that proposal is. So when I'm talking about sacredness, that's what I'm talking about. And one of the things I'm proposing, although I'm really happy to discuss it with you, and you know that, I'm proposing that non-theism has a flexible stance towards the answer as to what the sacred is, that allows for more recognition of right relationship to sacredness, especially in other religions, etc. And the second point, non-theism says that what it's trying to do, and I haven't made this clear, so I want to make it clear here now. Non-theism says that we although these experiences are happening here and this, we've tended to create, I don't know what to call them, Paul, and so I'm going to use this term, and I don't mean any insult or specification, but we've tended to create orthodoxies. I don't know if that's the right word, right? In which we say we give an answer to the sacred, and that then constrains our interpretation of sacredness. The non-theist is recommending going the other way. Let's get the best phenomenological functional account of sacredness and use that to constrain the answers we give to the sacred. That's the proposal.
Okay. I thought that was very good and very clear. And I think it's helpful to, especially what you just said at the end there, like in many ways, part of what we're trying to do at this point, this is historically, oh boy, there's so much I've been talking about lately. I'll see if I can summarize it. I mean, part of how we arrive at this in the West is certainly partly through pluralism. That with globalization, the world has opened up. And so we're looking for language that can recognize this phenomenological, and I think you have three good words: experience, realization, transformation, that you see happening in many different cultures in many different places in the world. Yes. Obviously, once Europe at the Columbian Exchange, when in a sense you really have the beginning of globalization after Columbus, now you have the Americas, and then you have the connection to Asia, you have the whole thing going on. Now suddenly groups are within recorded history at a different level. Obviously, these kind of contacts had been made prior to the Columbian Exchange. We just have very little documentation of them. And because we don't have a lot of documentation, we don't have a lot of material to sort of analyze. But now suddenly Christians and Buddhists, and eventually this, because of the British colonial situation, you have Hinduism, because the British need a name for whatever it is these Indians are doing. And, all around the world now, there's this human experience, human phenomena of transformation. And well, how does that then converse with the kinds of exclusive claims that develop in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam?
Yes.
And so there's going to have to be a conversation between these. And so I think, again, it's helpful to recognize that the direction that we're working from here is starting from the bottom. Now, this for someone like myself as a Christian minister, in a time and place where many people like yourself, whether people do it when they're young or people do it when they're old, they're leaving a religious community, a set of religious practices, beliefs, values, and they're going out. And usually when they do so, part of what prompts them is either usually a combination of this no longer works for me, which is language we put on something to sort of get a rough estimate. There's an intuitive sense of dis-ease, dissatisfaction. Everything in my world isn't lining up, and we can use McGilchrist's schema that, one side of the brain is looking at the other and saying, well, you're not really happy, so let's come to a conclusion that not this. But then suddenly, what about these other things? Because we notice transformations happen in people. And I think also with McGilchrist's idea, well, once we notice that transformations are happening, one hemisphere is going to say, okay, let's try to organize and systematize. And this is where you're going to have orthodoxies emerge even outside of traditions. Where things will begin to develop. And then we're going to have to seek around, look for language and somehow gain orientation with respect to these things. And so, I thought it very helpful in, as you just did right now, and as you did with Rafe Kelly, with an experience, realization, and transformation. Okay, we see that these transformations happen in people. Even if we are roughly unclear about how these transformations line up, let's say all the way from top to bottom, but just sort of here in this buffered secular space, we can see in a person that they're a little happier. And I love the language you used in the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Let's use agency, either reciprocal narrowing or reciprocal broadening.
Exactly.
So we can see that, let's say someone has, deconstructed from Christianity, or they've made a move that sort of crosses lines that have been around for a long time. And we see a transformation has taken place. And generally speaking, just within a little time frame, we look and we say, there seems to be some reciprocal broadening here. They've got a little bit more joy. They've got a little bit better sense of identity. They've got a little bit more energy and agency. And, now that obviously is within time frames, something that we hold a little bit of humility with, because what sometimes we have a little bit of a transformation and we think, oh, this is going to be a good thing. And then within days or weeks or even years, we bump into something and realize, oh, this, it's kind of going through a maze. I hit an end wall and now I have to backtrack. So it's helpful just to locate this in that frame, especially within the secular sphere, where, as I say often, we don't have stars to guide us, partly because of a lot of what has happened in the West over the last 500 years, to say, I'm not going to make a huge number of ultimate claims. And people deal with, use this kind of language. Well, for me, or for now, or for us, or within this tradition, we're always trying to locate things. Say, I'm not going to make my claim to ultimate, even though I think at some point we have to deal with the ultimate, and we will jump there. But we're here in these transformations, we can say, I might not be able to connect that to the ultimate, but for now, it seems an improvement.
Yeah, your dead reckoning metaphor.
Exactly.
Right. And I would buttress that by saying, there's increasing empirical evidence, that people and atheists have had these higher states of consciousness experiences. I've read books and reports, and they lead to these kinds of transformations. And importantly, these transformations, like they're by objective measures and by asking other people. I relate one in some of my videos about I've been doing Tai Chi Chuan religiously for like about 2-3 years. And I've been having all these amazing phenomenological experiences, days where I was as hot as fire and I had to do Tai Chi practically naked, and days when I'm cold as ice, and and I'm getting into the flow state, and all of that's happening. But then my friends in graduate school came up to me and said, "What's going on with you?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" "Well, you're way different than you used to be. You're much more balanced when you're arguing, and you're much more empathetic and picking up. You're much more flexible." And I realized, oh wow, the Tai Chi Chuan is permeating in my life and percolating through my psyche in ways I'm not recognizing, but other people are recognizing. And when you get, and in fact, I often say to my students, how do you know? They say, how do I know I'm doing it right? And I said, when other people notice a change in you, that's when you notice. That's when you know there's nothing inside the experience that's going to work for you to do that. And so you can get reports by other people. You can get more objective reports about, right, and Yaden's work and a whole bunch of people, yeah, these things happen. They happen on a spectrum of belief, and yet they reliably, not perfectly, but they reliably produce long-standing improvements. People have a mystical experience, the Griffith Lab. People have a mystical experience, and they have long-standing change in the personality trait of openness. That is that's not supposed to change. In fact, it's supposed to go down with time gradually. And in fact, it's open and it stays open. That's a real significant measurable change. And if we're going to be scientific about this, not scientistic, if we're going to be scientific about this, we have to acknowledge that, and we have to take it into account. Now, I'm interested in both the science of what's going on there, but I'm also interested in, but how do we enter into right relationship, the existential question? How do we frame this undeniable phenomena such that we make it appropriately available to people? That's the thing that I'm concerned with. And I happen to think that the language of common theism and atheism and the presuppositions don't do a good job of that. That's the main argument I'm making.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Now, once we've agreed to transformations, and that these transformations, and again, as a Christian pastor, I can see that these things can be very messy.
Yes,
in terms of people's lives.
Yes.
Because people, of course, are situated in
Yes.
structures
Yes.
and communities. And so, as you well know, to leave a community, with a faith tradition is a very difficult thing. And that's part of the reason, actually, that I'm not skeptical about the power and importance and relevance of transformations, because people don't take such risky, costly steps unless there is something powerful driving them.
Yeah, and you see this in the tradition. The Buddha leaves the palace and his family. You had to stop and pause on that. For many of us, that's leaving the palace. Oh yeah, no. He also leaves his wife and his young kid.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And Jesus, you have to leave your father and your mother. Right. And if you can't do that, you can't follow me. And oh no, Jesus didn't say that. Well, yeah, he did. And you got what does he mean? Right. And I'm agreeing with you. And I think you see in all of these traditions, the recognition that this is not like some little woo. This is it ripples through people's lives and identities in profound ways that are disruptive and can be hurtful to other people.
And then also we have to recognize that these transformations scale.
Yes.
In that we will have, for right now, there's at least in the United States, there's a lot of younger people who are leaving the Christian church.
Yes.
That then has impacts obviously on their peers, has impacts on institutions, has impacts in politics. And, I really loved what you said at the beginning of I wasn't able to stay the whole time, but the question and answer for the awakening from the meaning crisis, talking about, this powerful movement that, it always, whenever I read John's letters or the letters to the churches at the beginning of the book of Revelation, they're absolutely audacious because they're telling these tiny little struggling communities that you will overcome Babylon, which is an audacious thing to write at the beginning of the first century. And then by the fourth century, it happens. And it's like, wow. So part of the question for me is obviously, okay, because I walk with people as they go through transformations.
Yes.
And that community, and not just a community, because everybody in the community is going to bring their own idiosyncratic thing. But again, as a leader in a community, as someone who is, let's say, ordained in a church, who's a pastor, so as a shepherd, I walk with people in transformations, and sometimes those transformations are out of the church. Sometimes those transformations are into the church. That's part of the reason of my estuary project that I'm involved with. And so it's helpful to remember, or it's helpful to continue the conversation, understanding two things. Number one, when lately I've been talking about the upper and lower register.
Right.
When you undergo a transformation, I think sort of the upper half of the two world mythology in a person must sort of tie it to the, existentials, to the ultimates, to the absolutes. It's just sort of what we do. And another factor, sort of your, it's not reciprocal. It's the two opponent processing. So on one hand, the absolute pulls us, and on the other hand, the contextual pushes us.
Yes.
And so, but those tensions are always there in us. And so part of the bigger conversation in the midst of continual transformations are, okay, how can we assess? How can we sort of dead reckon from below? We're watching these transformations. What does that tell us about the ultimate? And because I think we're always doing this.
I agree.
And I don't think we can't.
I agree. And so there's 2 points I want to make in connection with that. One is these experiences, realizations, transformation, sacredness, right? Is often bound up with this is more real, the ontonormativity. This is more real, and that's exactly that's the motivating force. And this is one of Plato's great insights, to my mind. And that's related to the next point I want to make, which is a contra-Cartesian point, which is the realization that these transformations disclose truths that are not accessible before the transformation. And you have the whole problem of transformative experience that L.A. Paul talks about, and Agnes Callard, the idea that, and this is why I want to use the word realization, reality discloses itself in ways it previously didn't or couldn't. And that starts to get you, like, you start to wonder, in the proper sense of the word wonder, about, well, what is real? And I don't mean as a cafe, philosophical discussion as you smoke a cigarette. If you feel ontonormativity, you start to wonder, but what's really real? When I go through this transformation and I realize, and it's not just me transforming, it's the world transforming, the reciprocal opening. You start to like the question about the profundity of the sacredness raises the question about, well, what is the most profoundly real to me? What is it that's affording and driving the realization, if you'll allow me, and I'm putting this in quotes for a reason, from the side of the world. The world is also participating in this in some fashion. And you start to wonder about the ontology of the world, if to use a rather jargony way of putting it. But that's what starts, and that's what these people typically do. And like Comte Spoonville, he's an atheist and he has a mystical experience, and he says, it made him think about, well, what's going on? Like, how can I, what is this? Is this just sort of some sort of brain burp, or like, is it doing something? And if I rule out this experience, but it's like insight, and insight seems to be a driver of us discovering things in science and in art and in literature. So, and that's what I've been trying to do with the cognitive continuum hypothesis. Like, well, if you reject this and you realize it's the same machinery that's at work in flow and in insight, and in wondering, like you're putting yourself in a really dangerous position. So I would argue that those two things, right, really, like sacredness draws you towards it, and the fact that like the transformation is reciprocal, right, and we realize, wait, when I transform, the world discloses in ways it didn't before. And if I transform more such disclosure could occur. And that disclosure, I'm finding that disclosure intrinsically good. It's making me and my life better. So I should transform more. But what does that mean? Those questions come up. And the whole issue of how do I follow a path of transcendence, I think comes to, I'm not saying it comes to the fore for everybody, but it's highly probable it will come to the fore for most people.
Absolutely. And now you and I are, on the scale of things, quite cosmopolitan. We in a sense are always conscious of the pluralisms around us, and we have relationships across those pluralisms. And so that in many ways, we take on very measured language. I mean, that's sort of the culture of the cosmopolitan class. But if I, of course, having been a Christian missionary, working in African-American context, working in church context, what you just described is absolutely the case with Christian conversion. Because when someone converts, their entire world changes. And one of the things that you notice in a church, there'll usually be people who sort of inherit it, and then people who converted. And the converts are almost always more zealous.
Yes.
And,
yes.
Sometimes given to certain dogmatisms and absolutisms, because of exactly the dynamic that you just noted.
Yes.
Where, I love to use the illustration of Chuck Colson, who, Chuck Colson was Richard Nixon's hatchet man.
Yes. And
he was known as just a cutthroat political operative who would do anything for his boss. And then he begins, it's nicely documented in his book, Born Again. He begins to realize that, he's doing anything for his boss, but his boss is going to leave him hanging out to dry.
Which happened.
Which is exactly what happened. And there's this group of, deeply evangelical people in Washington, D.C. And, at one point, I paraphrase this. This isn't exactly, he records the moment in his book, but basically he goes home and he tells his wife, I've become a Christian. And she's like, I thought we were Episcopalians. And because, at that point, of course, for Chuck Colson, he has this religious transformation, and his entire life changed. And of course, then he's going to go to jail, and in prison, then obviously, I mean, it's almost sent, okay, you're going to become a monk sent to you by the United States government. You're going to live in a cell. You're going to spend time by yourself. You're going to have a new community around you of people who are also in cells. And of course, for Chuck Colson, that launches prison fellowship and all this kind of stuff. And, I want to, when I use illustrations, I always try to use illustrations. If people in the one side tend to be lean this way, I like using an illustration from the other political camp.
Of course.
Because it helps us recognize the commonality here in terms of these transformations. But then, of course, over time, I think we're always also, as human beings, both individually and communally, checking, I did this transformation. Whether I speak them or not, I've got intuitions of the absolute. and I've got it, and I'm seeing the world in an entirely new way.
Yes.
Am I fooling myself?
And you should. You should ask those
no,
questions.
absolutely.
And you can't reason yourself. And this is L.A. Paul's point. You can't reason your way through a transformation, and you can't go back to what made sense before the transformation as your normative base. And so you really are in a dangerous place. And I see, literature within Christianity and Buddhism and Taoism warning about this, right? And it's often, given certain mythological ways different for the culture, but there's this, there is exactly that. For me, that's why I've argued, and this is a hermeneutic exegetical claim. I claim that all of these traditions have said those transformations have to be bound up with the aspiration to wisdom, right? Where wisdom, again, doesn't mean being logical. It means this systematic attempt to systemically intervene in one's cognition to reduce self-deception, both individual and collective, and enhance meaning in life, right? And for me, that's quintessential to what I want to talk about. And I want to again recognize my loyalty to these other traditions, these traditions that call them non-theist, and the way they have helped coordinate that for me. The training of wisdom through mindfulness in Buddhism, the training of wisdom through flow in Taoism, and that helped me do that, coordinate the transformation with, I'm not claiming to be wise, that's ridiculous, but an improvement in wisdom. And of course, the Socratic Neoplatonic tradition has been just essential for me and continues to be. Now, the exciting thing for me is that I see some important, and this was your point, this is why I'm so excited about your video, when you compare me to, Bishop Barron, and the bishop was basically giving the Neoplatonic position. That's very fair to say, and to realize how big of a role the Neoplatonic tradition played within officially Orthodox Christianity and also on the edges of Christianity, right? And so I see I see a deep similarity between that and a lot of what I'm talking about, what I'm seeing and what I got from Buddhism and Taoism in terms of wise transformation. Sorry, this isn't meant to be insulting, but I see deep similarities between the Neoplatonic tradition that was taken into Orthodoxy and the Neoplatonic tradition that was outside and remained non-theist, and also these non-theist other religions. Other people have noted that the Kyoto school is big for noting that. The Suzuki noted the deep connections between, like the deep similarities between Zen and Eckhart, and and Heidegger picked up on it. I won't go on about that. I'm not the only person making this observation, but the realization that I was making a mistake and attributing all the way back a certain model of theism that is a post-deist model of theism, that was a mistake on my part. And so I'm very excited about what you did. And you basically, like, if you'll allow me to paraphrase, like, John, look, right, what you're talking about in non-theism, there's something very analogous that's gone on in what and this is what Kenny argues, what is properly called classical theism, the theism of the classical world. Yeah. And I think that's bang on. And I want to sink my teeth into that. There's thank you for that, first of all. But there's something, I want to open it up. There's something very powerful and important going on there.
Well, and I think part of, so again, for me as a Christian, when I've often told people I am not necessarily tremendously bothered by watching people deconstruct from Christianity. Mm-hmm. Because yes, sometimes the Christianity they are deconstructing should really be deconstructed.
Yeah.
And all huge traditions like this all have their nooks and crannies and better and
Yep,
worse and all
yep,
of that.
yep.
And so I
Yes.
know, there's, and it is natural to a religious tradition to have a tribal energy to it. And that's
Yeah.
because we need identity, we need community, and we
Yes.
need those frontiers and boundaries. And so, I don't apologize for that. But part of what interested me, and again, has been a real journey for me over these last 3 years, is to recognize, to ask harder questions about why, in some sense, classical theism was lost,
Yes.
and what kinds of theism have been expressed by the church. And, and this is sort of where where Jonathan Peugeot is someone to play with, because on one hand, through him, I can access some more of these classical things, because orthodoxy is really good at preserving stuff. They don't
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, the new things that come down the road usually come down the road for a reason.
Yeah.
And so on one hand,
Yeah.
you've got a guy he's a Roman Catholic bishop, so
Yeah.
he's not some rando Protestant pastor with an internet connection. He's a Roman Catholic bishop, and, very well educated, tremendously well informed. And so what I've seen in a lot of this, and what I saw immediately, why was Jordan, I mean, the amazing thing about those first few years of the Jordan Peterson phenomena was, I was in looking at people thinking, wow, significant transformations are happening in people
Yes.
who are watching Jordan Peterson videos. That's interesting. Why?
I can add to that. I mean, I'm not claiming to be Jordan Peterson or anything like that, but I get a lot of those emails. I get a lot of those comments. I get a lot of those reflections from people about my work.
Yep.
And that you and I talk. People have said that I'm a better Christian than any great, and I don't know what to do without that. No matter what I say, it's going to be insulting.
Right.
Like I want to somehow acknowledge that and be appropriately grateful for the kindness and the encouragement that is behind that act. But the actual proposition, I don't know what to do with. Yeah. So the thing for me is like, let me pick up on a specific thing that was in that video. It was also in the discussion that Bishop Barron and Jonathan Peugeot and Jordan Peterson and I had. I'm really happy and proud about that. I really want that to come out. And I think we all do. Bishop Barron tweeted a long time ago about it. And Jonathan was like, Jonathan and I actually recorded a follow-up conversation that's going to come out once it's released.
Oh,
we're all excited. We're all excited about it. But and this came up in the video that you made, and I want to zero in on a concrete example so people can get clear about what we're talking about. Okay, so I was educated about the ontotheological critique of Heidegger, and Heidegger's one of his main arguments was we have misunderstood being in terms of a supreme being that is the cause of beings. And that's just a fundamental category mistake. And that category mistake actually cuts us off from participating in being, capital B, and that's the history of nihilism. Now that's a profound argument, it's a profound point. And I'd always taken it, because I was brought up this way, that what theism meant was the idea of a supreme being. And then I hear, and I knew from the Neoplatonic tradition the criticisms of that, but I hear a bishop who's speaking on behalf of Thomas Aquinas, saying, well, no, that's just a fundamental mistake. Thinking of God as a being God is not the supreme being. That doesn't make any sense. That's a category mistake. He was making Heidegger's argument, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And then he's making that argument from the very Neoplatonic tradition. Now, for me, it was like one of the things that I see common theism and atheism arguing about is whether or not there is a supreme being.
Right.
And And to me, the non-theist says, that's just the wrong question. You're trying to get at the ultimate nature of reality being and the ground of being, to use Tillich's phrase, and you're just making a category mistake, both of you. The answer isn't yes or no. It's like, that's like asking what's north of the North Pole. You're asking the wrong question. And so for me, that I'm just trying to give a specific example. I have other things that I would, for me, right? And this is very much a move made in Buddhism. The gods are irrelevant. They might exist. Who cares? They're irrelevant because they're not ultimate in this proper way. Or the discovery of the difference between immortality and eternity within Greek philosophy. When the Greek philosophers realized that the Greek gods were only immortal and not eternal, this was like, right? Right? That sort of thing. And it's like, right. And then I hear Bishop Barron saying, oh yeah, well, blah, blah, blah. Of course, you know. And I knew Aquinas, I'd read it, but you know, but for me, that Platonic tradition had sort of been lost in the Catholicism that I had seen too. Yeah. But no, God is not, God is the ocean of being, right? To use one of Aquinas's beautiful phrases. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. He's clearly a bishop, so he's got to obey like an orthodox structure, right? He can't just say stuff willy-nilly because he's a bishop, but he's getting by, and he's doing it astutely. I don't agree with everything he says, but that made an impact on me. It was like, wow, here's somebody basically saying, yes, the ontotheological critique is right, and common theism and common atheism are both wrong. And he was trying to get that point across. It wasn't being I forget the name of the guy who's the cosmic skeptic. He wasn't getting that point. He just wasn't getting that point in a profound way. And so that's what I mean about, for me, that's sort of a defining feature of what I call non-theism, that there isn't a proposal that the sacred, not sacredness, that the sacred is the supreme being. There's no, it's being, which is properly understood, and this is the Buddhist meaning of it, as no thingness. But that same language is in the Christian tradition too. It's in Dionysius, it's in Erigena, it's in Maximus, right? That language is it's in Nicholas of Cusa, and I'm reading these people a lot. And so for me, I'm sorry, I'm going on about this, but I'm trying to get how this, like it made a significant impact on me.
Well, and I think it made an impact on me when I first began to see it, and I began to then connect dots with language that I grew up in, even Reformation period confessions. Right. I began to notice if not the language as such, let's say just a generation apart from that language was still pointing to it. Yes. And you could see that in the attributes of God, let's say, which of course I was trained in as, within the Reformation context. And for me, where this gets very interesting in terms of, because for me, what you just described is the reawakening of God number one. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what had happened, I think, after especially deism, when we conceptualized, we sort of were able to conceptualize the physical universe as kind of a replacement, laws of physics, kind of a replacement to God, that aspect of God and sort of the arena. Then what gets accentuated is the God number two, the agent. Yes. And because, and one of the things I also began to notice is, this is where I get into Pascal and the spirit of finesse. Yes. We can really, as human beings, the only way we can relate to the arena so often is via person. And because it's C.S. Lewis's his greatest novel, which he wrote with Joy Davidman, was Till We Have Faces.
Yes. Yes, it is. I read it. It's a beautiful book.
Yeah, it is. And I remember reading it, and I read it a couple of times, and I just had to kind of get my mind around the problem of why you can't see the God. Why can't you see the God? Now, this is very much, if someone's deep in God number two and sort of out of balance, it's all agentic. Well, an
Yeah.
arena is going to fill in over time. You can't help, you're not going to have agents who are
Very interesting.
completely
Yes.
without arenas. And so when I look at this, I began to notice with the Christian atheist arguments that it was all about God number two. Well, it's all about the agent, God as agent.
Yes.
And so then the atheists sort of punt, when Bishop Aaron sort of puts it back on him and says, well, how do you deal with suffering? And
They have no answer.
You have
And
no answer.
Yeah, they have no answer. You get sort of often tepid versions of enlightenment in the historical sense of modernity. You get, well, we'll improve people's lives, etc. And let's be clear, that did make a difference. People's lives were made better, but it was not without significant cost, and we're bearing that cost. I keep telling people, remember, Nietzsche didn't say God is dead to the believers, he said it to the atheists, right? You have to, the great profit of this has to be taken, I mean, profit in the biblical sense, and that's how he saw himself, I would argue. We have to take very seriously what he's pointing, like, how did we do this? How did we take a sponge and erase the sky? We are now forever falling. How do we do this? And the atheists are all sort of tittering and laughing at him, and he abandons them and he goes into the church, and he wants to sing a funeral dirge for God's death, right? Because we have to become worthy of this event. And so why am I saying all that? It's like, if you make God the ultimate subject, I think you're saying the same thing, then objectivity hangs free. That's the earth now disconnected from the sun. And he's using Neoplatonic imagery there, by the way. It's funny how much these people are influenced. Camus wrote his thesis on Neoplatonism, Christian Neoplatonism.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is the right word. That's why light is so powerful in The Stranger, right? And why he describes absurdity in terms of lucidity and light and all kinds of things like that. Anyways, I think I'm saying the same thing as you. If you make God the ultimate subject, objectivity swings free, and then you also have no way of relating the two together, right? There's no way, and there's no, and for me, Descartes epitomizes this, the Cartesian split. I recommend that people should read a lot more Spinoza. Carlyle's recent book, Spinoza's Religion, best book I've ever read on Spinoza, and she really makes clear. And that's why I bought these books, by the way, these books on participation. Spinoza was really trying to stop that, and he was really trying to steer away from deism in a very powerful way. I'm not saying he had the answer, but like there's a lot going on there that's really profound.
Well, that makes perfect sense, because it's right at that, historically, he's right at that point.
And he's in Holland, where
Yes.
Cartesianism and Calvinism are right like this together.
Right.
So he's right at the pivot point, and he's basically, so I would present to you the proposal that Spinoza is a great non-theist in the way I've been trying to talk about. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to do the reverse. He's trying to properly, I'm looking for a verb here, Paul. He's trying to translate, with all the sort of hermeneutic sense to that word. He's trying to translate all the God 2 language into God 1 language, but not in the sense of explaining it away as an atheist. He really thinks, he is committed to the proposition, no, this will actually bring about you loving God, the intellectual love of God. It's not an attempt to, people, it's all just metaphorical. We're just talking about the laws of the universe. And that's not, and that's what Carlyle's arguing. That's not what Spinoza is doing. He's trying to say, look, we've got to have a conception of God that is deeper than the ultimate agent and the ultimate arena. Ultimate, and this is Tillich's point too. The God beyond the God of theism is one of Tillich's great essays, right? Like, and people need to read it, right? They need to read it. The God beyond the God of theism, and the way he talks about it at the end of The Courage to Be, this God that's beyond the God of theism is the answer to the meaning crisis. So you can see this is really sort of just sparking like this, and this is why I'm reading all this stuff, like this trying to get it. I would want to say to you that the God beyond the God of theism, I'm being provocative here, is that which lies below God number one and God number two, and properly relates and grounds them together, such that the agent and the arena relationship of our life is properly grounded and honed.
Yeah.
That's what I would want to say to you.
Yeah. And I haven't read the essay, so I'll have to take a look at it. But that I think is the struggle that we're dealing with. And I think the struggle goes back to the Greeks. I remember, I've looked for it, but I can't find it. You know, part of what you see in the Greeks, let's say that the development of the fates.
Yes.
So what are the fates? Because if you look at Kaufman's argument that there's this tension between the agent and the arena.
Yeah.
That in a sense, the Greeks try to resolve with the fates, or you also see that the Greeks, you have Nike, victory. You take something like victory, which I think is similar to, you have experience, realization, transformation, and you turn it into a god. And that's a right move in terms of down below here, trying to figure out how to conceptualize victory. But how then do we want victory and we need victory. And so how then do we call victory to ourselves? Of course, in the ancient world, you call victory to yourself by sacrificing to the god. And, so you have a personal narrative relationship with the god in order to bring the god in and have the god, bring victory to you. Now, what happens, obviously, and I'm not anywhere near enough educated, but my suspicion is, why does science, the way that we recognize it today, why does that develop in the West? If you have a full-blown understanding of God number one that you are still living within, when you're dropping balls from a tower in Italy, you are doing theology.
You properly are. And I think the successor to the fates are the Platonic Forms. And the Platonic Forms are an attempt to ground intelligibility and to say that I'll use Jonathan's language, and this is what I mean by he's more radical than people realize. There are real patterns and there are real principles governing those real patterns. And there is a deep connectedness, and Pearl makes this in his Thinking Being, classical metaphysics in the classical tradition. There's a deep connectedness between intelligibility, being, and sacredness. And this is the Platonic notion of the form. And the interesting idea about it is you can even see in Platonism people wrestling with just the issue you made, because you have in Plato the forms they're just, the best analogy, it's only an analogy. It's like the formulas of chemistry. There's these formulas and they form a system, if I can use a neutral word. And then you get the Middle Platonists worrying about exactly that. But my relationship to this is so transformative, and you get the move. Well, maybe they're actually ideas in the mind of God. But then what you got to do is you got to really expand what you mean by God to do this, and then it goes on and on. But that move, right? So that move, and what I see Neoplatonism doing, and I want to mention in how I also see it in the Bible, and this will be maybe provocative, right? But what I see Neoplatonism doing is trying to get below the agent and the arena with the notion of the one, right? The notion, the one is somehow deeper than the agent and the arena, and you can get people like Proclus and how it generates the personal gods, but you can also get Damascus about how it leads to all this ineffable stuff, and they're trying to get it. And I want to put it to you that I see something, and other people have noted this. I see something similar going on in the Bible as a book. There's this withdrawal of God in the Bible. God's walking around. I don't know what that means. I'm just saying how it's written. God's walking around and talking at the beginning of the Bible, and then he withdraws, and he withdraws, and he's withdrawing into movements in history and empires. And I mean, I've talked to Muslims about this, and they're sort of freaked out by the Bible. It's like, where's God? Like he's like as far as we can tell, putting aside the idea of the incarnation and Jesus being the Logos, God speaks very infrequently in the New Testament at all, right? This is my beloved son, and a few other things. And it's like, I feel like the Bible is even wrestling with that, right? They're trying to wrestle with kind of a God number two that's, like in Genesis, and a God number one, which is really, I mean, Paul on Mars Hill, the God, we live and move and have our being, right? Right? And the Bible, I think, is actually wrestling with that too.
I agree. So obviously the story starts with, God walking with the man and the woman in the garden.
Yeah.
And then the second scene, you have two brothers who are both sacrificing, and, God favors the one. And again, the language is so completely mysterious.
Yeah.
And so, the hunger for God in the other, and the hunger for the father's affirmation drives the one brother to kill the other brother.
Yeah.
And of course, but there is some coming and going, because of course, with Israel and Egypt, they have so forgotten. Well, you could do a lot with Exodus.
Yeah.
They have so forgotten the God, but it could very well be that they have forgotten the God because there are so many gods.
Yes.
And, there's a God on the throne. So then, of course, you have the desert wandering. And I always tell people, in some ways, the tabernacle is sort of a God containment unit. I mean, because you don't want him to break out, because when he breaks out, but so, and I think that's right. And then as you go then through the Hebrew scriptures, once Israel is, you have God showing up outside of Babylon, and then it's like, well, wait a minute, you always had geographical gods.
Yeah.
You're how are you here? And then you have this brilliant move by the Hebrew prophets of, no, God sent Babylon, in a sense, right. God sent the gods of Babylon down to destroy the temple. And it's like, how does that work? And then, of course, for a Christian, you have the New Testament where, God writes himself into the story. But then after Acts, then God is then obviously regularly coming down through the Spirit, onto Gentiles.
Yes.
But then, of course, the climactic, apocalyptic book at the end of the story where, cover us, the great and the small of the earth, plead to the mountains, cover us from the face of the one on the throne and the Lamb. So no, the Bible is very much a conversation about the God number two, who walks and has conversations with Abraham, and will appear to David, and David will sing love songs to him, and David calls himself his son.
Yeah.
And then the Spirit and the incarnation and all of that. But yet also within the Bible is still God number one. Yeah. When Joseph will say things like to his brothers, you sold me into slavery. Do you have any idea how much I suffered because you idiots did this to me? You meant it for evil, God meant it for good. And so you see all through the Bible also this borderline, arenic, agentic, trying to work things out of the God of, it's in a sense the God of karma. This happened, therefore it's God's will. That doesn't leave Christianity. And that remains in it. And you see it all over the place. This happened, therefore it was God's will. Oh, but that sometimes these things that happen are really bad and awful. And that, of course, sets up a bunch of the stuff that Cosmic Skeptic was wrestling with. Right. As if Christians, we're the ones that are actually in here praying, and then it doesn't work, and we're keeping our faith. You think we're blind to this dynamic? We live personally with that tension, and that, of course, sets up, part of where, so someone has a transformation, and then they can't help but feel it, both the absolute and the contextual.
Yes,
and it comes together in a transformation. I think that's I think that's fundamental to a transformation.
I agree.
That you don't just say, oh, this kind of works for me. You say, everything is different now. The arena in which I am living has fundamentally changed because of this transformation, and everything is different. And I'm willing, let's say, case of Paul of Tarsus, I'm willing now to, my closest friends now want me dead and are in fact seeking my life. But I'll take that because of this transformation and the new world I am now living in. And so I think as these transformations go from individual, because, you know, we're, as human beings, these things go viral, you know, good things and bad things. I mean, even suicide can be a contagion.
Yeah.
And so these transformations, then they start to spark between us, and then they start to develop into communities. And then, but of course, all those communities are going through history. I mean, this is religion. And in many ways, you know, I love how you put this here. You know, this is the human story. It is a story of, you know, these realization, transformation experience, but then sacredness always seems to long for the sacred.
Yes, it does. And I think that's well put. I guess I want to ask you a question then. You seem to acknowledge the, I guess, the plausibility of the proposal I made about that I see exemplified in somebody like Spinoza, independent of the degree to which he succeeded, about trying to get a language, a conceptual vocabulary, a theoretical grammar below, if that's even the right metaphor, below, between, beyond God one, God number two, like to try and that is in some sense the ultimate. And I'm wondering, because part of what I think you saw it too, part of what happens is in the theist atheist debate is equivocation between God number one and God number two all over the place. And that, to my mind, that equivocation blocks the idea of God. I don't know what number to give to that. Maybe God to infinity or something. I don't know what to call it, but the below, beneath, right? The deeper than, you know, this is why, you know, Whitehead's bipolar, which is not a good, we maybe should call it dipolar so we don't confuse it with the disorder, view of God is both the ultimate subject and the ultimate object, and that which lies beneath both of those and makes both of those domain possible. Spinoza doing the same thing. Thought and extension are just two different aspects of the fundamental reality. And so what I'm trying to do is to come up with what would that language be like, such that I'm trying to point below. I'm trying to almost, the image I have in my mind, I'm doing my thing. I mean, I didn't mean to, but the stereoscopic, here's God number one, and you use this language sometimes, so it's fair. Here's God number one, God number two lens, but you know, I want to actually see the depth. I want to see through them to the depth behind them. And I want to know, and maybe this is impossible for me. Maybe I have to go through, I would need to go through some transformation that I can't, but I want to try and participate in the crafting of the language that allows that stereoscopic vision, right, possible for us. Because I see other people like Spinoza or Tillich in, you know, the God beyond the God of theism, and he's not advocating atheism. That's just a mistake. I want, they're onto something, and, you know, and they both, and they're at different ends of modern theology. Spinoza's at the beginning, Tillich is near and towards, when some people say towards the end of it in some ways. I don't know what that means, but anyways, right, more recent. And they're both saying that move is essential for responding to the meaning crisis. And that's like, I pay attention to that claim. And I want to, like, what do I need to do? And what do I need to do transformatively, existentially, conceptually, in order to grok that, sorry, that's from Robert Heinlein, Strange Line, right? In order to get it in a profound way. That's part of how I see the project of non-theism and trying to put it into discussion with classical theism. I want to get that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if this is making sense to you.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm at the very edge of my thinking and where I am. But that's what I want to be able to understand, like, why is it? Like, so the metaphors that are used in Buddhism and Taoism are very much agentic. They're spatial metaphors, the void, the way, right? And the West,
They're
uses
arenic. You're saying
yes,
they're arenic.
I meant arenic. Sorry,
Yeah,
I meant arenic, not agentic. Whereas the West is very agentic,
right?
As you point out. And I think, again, this is my response to pluralism, which you've already. I think they both have something to teach us about the sacred in some profound way. And again, what I'm trying to do with non-theism is look through those two lenses, the Eastern and the Western lens. And I know this is audacious, but I'm provoked by, by Spinoza and Tillich and other people saying, but this is what you have to get in order to respond to nihilism, to the meaning crisis, etc. Sorry, I'm getting very passionate here. But
no. I get it. Keep going. You're fine. I don't ever. I think, just a few things. Number one, I can't. We never do it alone.
Oh, of course.
So number one, we never do it alone.
That's why I'm here talking to you.
Exactly. So we never do it alone. And I think deep within Christianity, I'd see people. And it's absolutely appropriate and biblical to talk about the Holy Spirit being a gift. But I think what has happened in our culture is that gift sort of became a possession of ours. And no, you are possessed by the Spirit. It is nothing it's a category mistake that you imagine you can possess or wield.
Oh, well done, Paul. That's excellent. Well done.
So that's one thing. And I also noticed in reading the New Testament, because of course I'm a minister, I read the New Testament all the time. The Spirit is at least as much between us as within us.
I'm so glad you said. I mean, you'll know that I'm doing Lectio Divina with David Bentley Hart's new translation of the New Testament.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Does he talk in that language?
Well, he's Eastern Orthodox, so there's Neoplatonic language, right, in his theology, but he also, like, the experience of God, he's really willing to use, experiences of experiences, realization, transformation of sacredness from Eastern traditions to talk about, that God is ultimately bliss in some way. That's right out of Vedanta. That's right out of the Upanishads, right? Yeah. And he's happy to do that, and he still thinks. And I take him to be sincere that is still very consonant with his orthodoxy in the sense of Eastern Orthodoxy, and it's been really powerful for me to do that, because he's he knows the Greek really well, and he's very honest, and he knows the whole theological tradition and the Neoplatonism and the Middle Platonism that's around, and the Stoicism that and so you're reading, when I read passages and sorry, I mean this to be provocative in a good way, not in a derogatory way. The New Testament is weirder than I've ever read it before.
That's a good sign. So then, we're never do it alone. The Spirit is between us. It is always a gift.
Yes. And
I think that's where especially ministers, because we are practitioners, it's always a gift. That sight is always a gift. But I think the fourth thing is that I think it gets fundamental. It has to be fundamentally manifest in where heaven and earth meet together. And so, even though language and narrative, poetry, these are all enormously powerful compression mechanisms, I think action is finally even more powerful a compression algorithm than speech, because in action, heaven and earth meet.
So I'm now going to say this word to you that picks up on it perfectly. Yes, indeed.
And so as I'm encouraged, because so then when I think, if you talk to Roman Catholics or Eastern Orthodox about the Protestant Reformation, it's kind of like, oh, I wish we could have avoided that. And as a Protestant, I say, I bet you we couldn't, because it was popping up in all kinds of places even before Luther then was the earthquake, but Jan Hus and
Yeah,
Wycliffe,
yep.
all those tensions were there in the system. And all the Orthodox say, well, if you had always listened to us before, maybe we wouldn't have had it. Well, I can't answer any of those questions. Okay. And I don't need to, but I do think that, we are living in an exciting time, because I think we are sort of at the end of that long 500-year thing, and we are coming into a new something. And I like, just like you, I've looked at the atheist theist debates saying, this isn't how we are transformed.
Exactly. It's sterile.
Yeah.
I find a sterility in it. And it lacks the vitality. But that leads me to a question I wanted to ask you, and I want to ask it to you in fellowship and friendship, and which is your argument of the spirit of finesse. And so I've thought a lot about that, and I tried to answer you honestly and critically, in the good sense of the word, when you presented that argument. But and if I get your argument wrong, please interject. But part of what you're saying is there's a spirit of finesse, and relating to God as a person enhances the spirit of finesse, and that's why we keep coming back to it. And you were very careful about, you have to take care about idolatry throughout all of that. You said that. I get that. I'm not trapping you into any small box. And if I am, tell me. But I was thinking, because I'm thinking about Spinoza's claim about the intellectual love of God, and he doesn't mean intellectual the way we mean the word intellectual. He means in the Neoplatonic sense as the intellect, right? That the act of intellection, with the scientia intuitiva, in which we realize our deep participation in God. And the Carlyle book is all about that. Spinoza's religion is when we go from reasoning it to realizing that everything is in God. That's what brings about blessedness, right? And Spinoza that's what he means by the intellectual love of God. He doesn't again mean sitting at a cafe saying wordy things about God. He means this profound experience, realization, transformation that brings about blessedness. And as a response, he thinks this is a better response to the meaning crisis than Descartes' proposal of pursuing a kind of epistemic certainty, etc., etc. Now, Spinoza also said, and such a man there's nothing he would try less to do than to get God to love him in return. No, just give me a minute.
No, and
the reason he says this is he says, to do that would be to subvert. He thinks of love as a virtue in both the moral sense and the empowerment sense. And to do that would be to remove the virtue within love, because if virtue is not for its own sake, then it is not virtue, right? And if you are loving so that you get loved back, then it's not actual love. And I think there's profundity there. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, the Bible seems to use lots of impersonal metaphor. Well, I'm reading Dionysus, like I do Lexio on Dionysus, the names, and there's just as many impersonal names as there's personal. God's a rock, right? Right. God's a light, God's a wind, right? And sometimes he's not a wind, right? And all this
They're
stuff.
all very Arenic.
Yes. And I was thinking, is it not possible for people to fall in love with, let me try this. So Aquinas, God is the ocean of being, and he's not even an ocean because that's a thing, but something like that.
Right.
But I know people who have a profound love of the ocean.
Yeah.
And it's even it can become properly spiritual for them. I have such a love for the wind. I don't know why, but it's just, and of course that picks up on, Barfield and the double meaning of wind and spirit. And I would say, and the Taoists have that love for the Tao. Is it not possible to have that kind of profound love to something that is not conceived of as a person?
I think, well, let's talk about loves. You know,
Yes.
C.S. Lewis had his,
Oh,
actually the audiobook of C.S. Lewis's Four Loves, Lewis actually reads it, which is quite fascinating.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
Storge is, you know, we talk about phileo, agape, eros. The fourth one is usually not talked about much, which is storge, which is sort of affection.
Yes.
And I would say that, yes, we can have love for arenic entities, but I think part of what we want for that love, how do we want to act out that love? Usually with engagement. So I want to go into the ocean and I want to let the ocean have me. And with the wind, I don't just want to think about wind in the abstract. I want to go into the wind and have it blow me and then push back on the wind.
I want to couple with it.
Yes.
I want to couple with it. Yes.
Yes. And I think there's, and in that sense, it's very difficult to not personify and fall in love, you know, to personify the wind in order to really share in a dance with it, and to have the wind know me and me know the wind, you know, to love and be loved. I mean, I think love always wants that, you know, reciprocity going back and forth. And I think that's part of the reason why, you know, we sort of put romantic love or interpersonal love at the heights, because it is far more terrifying, because once we are relating to, we agentify the ocean, we agentify the wind. I mean, I don't know, you know, I love that conversation you had with Jonathan, because, you know, as Jonathan said, you go up a certain high and maybe up beyond, you know, we can only imagine, and there it sort of takes an impersonal thing. But as long as we're involved with any of this, I don't know that we are capable of really loving without interacting and having giving and receiving. I don't know. Maybe I think that's part.
You're being honest, and I appreciate that. And you're being thoughtful, and I appreciate that. And I'm not trying to win an argument with you.
No, I know that. I trust you, John. You don't have to worry.
So here's what, like, first of all, I take Spinoza's point to be clear, and people don't realize that, you know, Spinoza, he quotes the Epistle of John at the beginning of like one of his major works, right? Because he like those who live in love, right, are live in God. God and John's proposal that God is agape. And Spinoza is using that when he's making this proposal, because I think he's pointing to the conception that, well, no, agapic love is actually beyond, right, erotic and philia, and agapic love doesn't look for reciprocity. And you know, Jesus says that, you know, God's love is like the rain; it falls on everybody. It's not looking for reciprocity.
That's his perfection.
Yeah, yes.
That's his telos.
Yeah, which is really kind of an interesting way of talking about it. And isn't there something agapic in what I'm proposing, that when, you know, I'm sorry, I don't want to sound romantic and like Don Quixote or something, but, you know, when
That's
I'm
a wonderful
loving,
book.
it is a wonderful book. It is a wonderful book, right? And I'm putting this as a question, right? Isn't Spinoza getting something right about virtue and agape by not looking for reciprocity as being central to it?
I don't know if it's not looking for it as much as not demanding it, but I think it still hopes for it. I don't think love, I think love won't, I think love is disappointed with indifference. Because let's say, you know, I love Yosemite National Park, and any chance I get to take that little 3.5-hour trip I'll go to Yosemite and I always take cameras with me, and I'll annoy my family because I'll stop and my family will say, how many pictures do you have of that rock? And in many ways, the rock is indifferent to me. I certainly know that, but part of me longs for a communion with the arena. And I think it's in that way that spaces become sacred to us. And this is where I sort of pick up on Lewis in his book Miracles, where the vision is that we we are the stuff of earth and the breath of God, and nature is to be our sister, and we long to dance with her, but we have become estranged from her because of our hubris and our avarice, and so we have abused her, and so we have a prickly relationship with her. And then in the resurrection, I mean, I think part of why Christianity can say, oh yes, the vision of God, but we are not fine, our telos is not finally merely seeing God, but God clothing us with the flesh of a new creation, by which the relationship with our sister will now finally fully be healed, and we can dance with her like we dare not dance in this world.
And I want to be honest, that resonates with me. I mean, there's beauty in what you're saying, but I'm gonna give to you the other inkling. So I want to talk about when I'm reading Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, and this scene is in the extended cut, but it's not properly given the momentousness it should. Sam and Frodo are in Mordor, and it's just oppressive, and they're losing, and the clouds part for a moment, and I can't remember which one it is. I think it's Sam sees the light of the stars, and the fact that the stars are above all of this, literally, and also in the sense you're talking, they are untouched by all of this, and none of this touches them. And the fact that that's an aspect of reality gives him great comfort. I also get that comfort. And I think that's something that Spinoza's also pointing to, right? That there's also a way in which, I don't like this word, but I'll say it, the impersonal, right? Can also give us tremendous hope. I mean, that's what Tolkien's doing in that moment. He's doing in that scene.
Yeah.
And I kind of like the proposition that, truth and justice might be like what Plato says. They might be impersonal. They might be beyond, right, the vicissitudes of human personality. And that's almost important to how they work and how they function. I don't know if I'm making my point well, but I'm trying to.
It is. And that's true too. And I think that's part of the reason why, the psalmist, you are my rock.
Yes.
You are my fortress, and you I put my trust. It's
yes.
and that's, in some ways the Bible then is that example from Lord of the Rings. If you read it in the text, it's far more powerful in the text than it is in the movie. And
exactly.
Tim Keller, this minister in New York City, he tells the story that when he was being wheeled into surgery, right before they put him under, he didn't have a psalm on his mind like a Christian minister should. He thought about that moment in the text, because Keller's a huge Tolkien file, and the light of the star smote him. But what's interesting, because of course it's Tolkien, the stars for Tolkien are,
alive. Yes.
Alive.
Yes.
And so I think you're right in that there is when we say in the Psalms, God is our rock, we are leaning into a steadfastness from God that we often only experience in his arenic, in our experience of him as arenic.
That's
that this does not change.
And
part of the terror of personal relationship is, and you hear that in other Psalms, oh Lord, why are you so far from me? Why do the wicked triumph and the good are squashed? And actually, you know, the Old Testament is full of that. And you know, also in the Old Testament, of course, you have law, which is also kind of a post-agentic, arenic actualization. But yet we always know that law comes to an end because there must be a judge, because law itself is too low resolution to finally meet all pieces for what they are. Now, you said that eloquently in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. That was a powerful point. And so this, I think you're exactly right that this, we at some point we long to get beyond the agent arena relationship, and we have an intuition that the arenic and the agentic will meet.
Yes, well, this is well put. I like that. So let me try again. Let me move it into. I think we're making progress. I feel we're making progress. If you feel that I'm just belaboring something, then let me know.
Not at all.
So, and I grew up with this, and I think this is a fairly prevalent thing for Christians. So they love the Bible, and the Bible is holy. And it's like, I don't like the Bible, like the Bible isn't the person. But what I mean is there's a love there, and there's an attribution of sacredness, even of the sacred, to this. Let's be fair, this impersonal object. And don't say, well, it's a story about people. That's not the point. That's not the point. I can have a rock carved with that. This is not a person, right? But especially the church I was brought up in, you know, and I've heard Catholics, sometimes mean-spirited, sometimes loving-spirited, talk about Protestants having the paper pope, that the Bible is basically like the Pope. They treat it like a person that makes pronouncements, and it's like, no, it's not. It's a book, right? And then, but now to try and make it more fair, right? I have the same relationship to Plato's Republic. I love this. One of my best friends is Plato's Republic. And it's sacred to me because of the way I described. It has been constant. It has been trustworthy in its ability to afford reciprocal opening and grow with me as I grow. I'm reminded of another part of the Psalms where the deep calls to deep, and Plato's Republic has never failed to do that for me. Now, it doesn't mean I can just sit back and look at it. I have to participate in it. But see what I'm trying to get at? I'm trying to get at with both within and without Christianity. Again, this we can have this profound love, and we want to attribute even a sacredness to that, a holiness to it, because what we're in relationship with is constantly doing that with us. Yeah. So that's another example. I wanted to get your reflections and response on that.
I'm very happy that Protestants have not gone so far to say the Trinity is Father, Son, and Holy Scripture. But that is a constant issue in Protestantism.
Okay.
That in some ways the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church don't quite have those issues. I get into regular conversations with respect to icons, for example.
Yes.
And so Calvin, one of the things that Calvin dealt with, the scriptures, and this is the language we use in the church, the scriptures don't come alive for you apart from the work of the Holy Spirit. And in that way, Calvin tries to keep the sola scriptura, keep the Bible from becoming an idol.
Right.
And with Protestants, often the Bible, Protestants will use the Bible idolatrously.
Right.
But the Bible is always supposed to be, it's supposed to guide us to God. The Bible is not God.
Mm-hmm.
And, as a Protestant, it's really important to say that. Now, again, part of what I think happened with the Protestant Reformation is there was just a sense that there stuff had accumulated in the church, and there needed to be a scraping done. There needed to be some housekeeping done. Now, as is almost always the case with human beings, we use our agency we don't use our agency well, even with the best intent, even
Yes, yes.
and because we simply, and Gandalf, says that beautifully to Frodo when in the mines of Moria,
Yeah, yeah.
Frodo's, I wish Bilbo had killed Golem. And Gandalf says, are you able to, give life and take it? Now, obviously, the thing for human beings is, well, we give life in this, rather unscientific drama, but we
Yeah,
take it with ruthless
yeah,
self-righteousness.
yes.
So, yeah, that's figuring out our relationship with the Bible is and is a difficult thing, but at least with Calvin, it was always the Bible is a tool used by Scripture, and just functionally in a community, it's helpful to have a canon. Yet, if you live within that community, you very quickly realize that there's some parts feel a little more canonical than others.
That sounds almost like a George Orwell statement there.
Yes. And so what happens is then that there's sort of an epigenetics on top of the genetics that sort of
Yeah, yeah.
go with the Bible and traditions. And yeah, it's totally messy. It's totally messy. But so Peugeot and Richard Rowland was doing a conversation about icons, and Richard Rowland had been a Reformed Baptist and went to Reformed Baptist Seminary, and there were these statues outside the seminary and pictures in there of former lights of their tradition, and he's like, these are icons, these are
Yeah.
So it's this human, it's our humanity that we can't help but be who we are. And again, for me, in terms of my Calvinism, that's why I appreciate my tradition, in that, finally, fully, it's God's gift to us. And it doesn't mean we don't have work to do, but even, back to moments of transformation, again, I find it, people will talk about the path that led up to it, but almost always at the moment of release, it so feels like giftedness.
And that's used by the people who are in the flow state. By the way, Csikszentmihalyi passed away.
Oh,
Yeah, just to
wow.
Yeah, that's a great loss. So let me ask you a question that's both philosophical and asking as a friend. I mean, I know what Calvin might say, but I'm wondering what you say. My relationship to the Republic, would you consider that idolatrous?
No.
Right.
My relationship, I mean, there are times when I read C.S. Lewis and I think, am I thinking he should be in the Bible? And then I read other C.S. Lewis, like, oh, good thing he isn't. So we all, we can't help but fall in love with places. I love Yosemite National Park. There's some places, Calvin College, for me, I spent years on that campus. That's sacred ground for me in some ways, that I go there and it's not like other places. I think it's just how we are. I don't think there's anything that we should be ashamed of. I mean, look at Dante's Divine Comedy,
Yeah.
Virgil, look who his guide is.
Yeah.
So I Christians, there's this weird thing where on one hand, God is a refining fire and he's holy, and you can never measure up. On the other hand, God is enormously generous. And so, God's perfection in the Father's perfection in the Sermon on the Mount. He sends the rain to fall on the fields of the just and the unjust.
Yes.
And be perfect. And that's so often I'd hear in Protestantism that be perfect was always in this peculiar, narrow, rigid, but then, well, why don't you actually look at the text?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Radical generosity, which to me, again, is what the central moment of Christianity. Well, incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, ascension. It's all one drama. But at the center is someone who is being brutalized by his creation, And he says on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And so even in the relationship between the Son and the Father, there's this dialogue.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's a difficult dynamic to figure out how to live with. On one hand, this, the most absolutist demand coupled with the most irresponsible generosity. And I think it's those
Yeah.
qualities that we see in Jesus that is the reason. I mean, Tom Holland in one interview notes, he says, the fact that they were able to construct a text that presents a character which has been fresh and, transformation inducing, not just for the first century in that they were written, but,
Yeah.
across cultures and through time. And in fact, that 4 people did this about the same person. It's to me, it says something about, I don't know. Peterson has good language about it. He says, oh, that's archetypal. You can't get around it. And that's how I feel about that story often. So,
and you should. I mean, I'm not trying to challenge or deny that. What I was trying to get at was, just as like there's an intuition that the agent and the arena, there's something below them. I'm wondering if there's an impersonal and personal form of finesse, and there's something below that. People have coined this term transpersonal, and they're trying to get clear about what it means. But and I'm thinking that those two, they fit inside each other. I'm not quite sure which fits inside which. That's what I've been trying to gesture towards. And I see, I'm reading Nicholas of Cusa right now, and he's playing with that a lot. He sets these oppositions up, and then you sort of do massive frame breaking, because neither one of, he'll first just use a geometrical example. Like, okay, so I have a circle, and as I expand the circle, the arc gets less and less. So an infinite circle is a straight line, and your mind goes bang. That's like a Zen koan. And then he does the same thing in the vision of God. He does the same thing. He said, the transcendence and the immanence. Try and do that with them. Each one is undermining the other, and yet somehow, if you get the bang, then you're getting the actual thing. That's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to do exactly that move. And again, this has been sort of the guiding impulse in what I call non-theism. That's what I keep trying to do again and again and again.
When I look at, so if you read Matthew, it's the kingdom of heaven, and Mark and Luke, it's the kingdom of God, and John, it's eternal life, it's a life of the age, in Greek. But Paul has in Christ.
Yes.
He almost, he makes Christ Arenic.
Yes, he does,
which is really interesting.
Yes, and I think it's Carlyle. Spinoza actually cites Paul trying to pick up on that, and he uses that when he makes his proposal that being in God is the fundamental ontological thing we have to get. We have to recognize, again, not just intellectually, propositionally, we have to recognize it transformatively. We have to transform so that we can come into the best possible conformity to that reality that is possible for human beings.
Right. We have to realize it.
Yes, exactly.
It is finally realization. And so, I think for Christians, Christ is, of course, that.
Yes.
It's heaven and earth coming together. And then for the Christian, someone made a comment about, they thought I had some weird, strange name for my church. And I said, well, read First Peter 2, because Christ, who is the living stone.
Yes.
And then we then are living stones, and we are built into a temple. So if you're paying attention to this agent arena relationship, it's all over the New Testament.
Yes. That's well said. That's very well said. It's very well said. Wow. I'm finding this conversation very helpful. So thank you for it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I have so benefited from your work, and look, more than just your work, your person, because you have, I have seen in you. I mean, you and I have never met in the flesh. We always have this media between us, but I have seen in your work, someone who is hungering and thirsting for righteousness. And by righteousness, I don't mean a conformity to a list of, narrow precepts, but Dallas Willard in his book, The Divine Comedy, he's trying to get at dikaiosune. And when I read, so Dallas Willard, he taught philosophy at University of Southern California, and he passed away just a few years ago. But so he taught phenomenology. He was a Husserl expert. And he wrote this book, The Divine Comedy, which very much he was one of the sort of revivifiers of Christian practice, intentional practice. And I've read his book, The Divine Comedy, a number of times. It's one of these books that I go back to regularly. And one of the things that he did in that book was he mentioned dikaiosune, and then he started connecting it with Plato, which sort of prompted me to, I want to take a look at Plato's Republic in the Greek, and I want to play around with this stuff. And so for me, Dallas Willard sort of helped me connect some of these things. Okay, what on earth is this righteousness that we read about in the Gospel of Matthew, and of course in the Beatitudes, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and then just the absolute radical statement that Jesus makes, and they will be satisfied.
Yes.
That's, on one hand, quite rightly, it's sort of like, trying to get at this is sort of like trying to get at the problem of the exclusive and the inclusive. And, in sort of a Hegelian way, we decide, but when Jesus says those kinds of things in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be satisfied. What a radical pronouncement, and what a word of hope. And I get that. I don't know if I can ever get that from Yosemite Valley. And one of the things that was interesting in the Bishop Barron unbelievable thing was Bishop Barron kept coming back to God speaks. Now, Yosemite Valley certainly does speak to me. Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glories of God. Day after day, they pour forth speech. And so in many ways, I go to Yosemite Valley, and it's a sacred place for me. And it speaks to me of glory and grandeur and patience and also danger. There's wild animals there, and I meet bears in Yosemite. But, to be given a word of hope that those who hunger and thirst for dikaiosune, they will be satisfied. And, and if I can live into that and say, okay, so I watch transformations around me, and they're stepping over lines that make me anxious, and I watch people in process, and I'm watching this very live community around me, in multiple communities, but now within me. And again, I think you really need an agent to say, and I loved how you said it in that video, being is good.
Yes.
Wow. Do I dare hope that? On what basis can I responsibly maintain that hope? Because if being is good, that's going to have entailments in terms of my actions. And so, that my life isn't just, 0 to 80 or 90, and I have to try and in whatever hedonistic, even moral hedonistic way, squeeze all the goodness out of it so I can experience it. But that, somehow, and this is where you get into the upper register, somehow I can't but imagine that maybe somehow I participate in something that won't simply end with the termination of this heart and this body. And I don't know. I mean, and this is, and if in fact being is good, might I not take time and sit with the homeless or the schizophrenic or the poor, not just jigger the economics and maybe help them have more stuff, but might I not, might I not be able to lend some of that agency to them?
I get it. I think it was I forget which video conversation I was saying, when you're with somebody who's lost someone to death, there's nothing you can say. What you have to do is be there beside them.
Yeah.
Like you have to be present. And I get what you're saying about that. I hear what you're saying, that there's that kind of connection that only a person can provide for us.
Yeah.
I see the truth in that. I guess for me, I guess I'm wrestling with the question, and I'm not trying to like make a confession to you or anything. I'm wrestling with the question of whether or not people have genuinely, profoundly personal relationships to things that are not properly thought of as persons, because persons are bounded spatial temporal things, they're et cetera, and that seems I see. I'm proposing to you that maybe the Bible is actually suggesting that, and Plato and Spinoza are arguing that we can, in fact, enter into deeply personal relationships to, I don't know what to call it, because it's not a being, right? To ontological placeholder here to, right, some ultimacy, some really realness that is not properly thought of as a person, and it's not properly thought of as not a person. That's what I'm trying to get at. And that again, the stereoscopic, that we have a impersonal personal relationship to this thing that is neither a person nor not a person, and that the wisdom is trying to coordinate those together in a life that's well lived. And again, that's what I keep trying to come back to.
Yeah.
And you just did both sides of that. Yeah, right. We're in Christ, but Jesus is like somebody who can sit beside you when you're grieving.
Yeah.
And I get that, and I'm trying to honor that, but I'm trying to say why I'm committed to what I'm seeing as non-theism, because I see it as trying to make this question the central, I guess I'll use this adjective, the central philosophical theological question. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess, finally.
Well, I don't know that Bishop Barron's non-theism is impersonal. And so I don't know that non-theism is necessarily impersonal.
I agree with you on that.
I don't know. It's a question.
But the problem I have with the adjectives, and this comes up when you did it with the Bible, right? And there's ways in which we can make personhood an idol, because the meaning I have for that term is of things. You and I are things in the ontological sense. I don't mean in the moral sense. That's ridiculous. But right. So all here, I can say this very confidently. All the people that I've met have been things. And so for me to try and say, well, I have a personal relationship to something that is properly no thing, I'm trying to work out what that means, because it isn't easily resolved. Yeah. I know what you mean by when you say Bishop Barron's relationship isn't impersonal, his non-theism, but I wonder if it's also properly called personal, or if it's something somehow beyond both of them in an important way. Well, I might be pushing you, and I don't mean
no, you're not pushing me. I think it's easy for us to imagine that our grasp on the personal is limited by our capacity and experience of the personal. Yes. I mean, we can sort of level up imaginatively, but that's always sort of, if you have a camera or a phone, you have the physical zoom, and then you have the digital zoom, and the digital zoom is always crummy. You said persons are bounded temporal things, and I don't know that that's true. And part of why I don't know that that's true is because on one hand, you are a thing, and we both agree with that, but there's something about you that is more than a thing. And we completely recognize that with each other.
Yes.
And what that moreness is terribly difficult to articulate. But again, to pull a Peterson, we act as if that you have moreness and I have moreness. And when we don't act as if people have moreness, oh,
No, we should recognize that. Although I think there's a way in which everything has moreness and everything has suchness.
Yeah. But then to sort of be, to what degree are we lending? So when I sit down, when I work with one of these homeless addicts,
yeah,
what I do in a very strange way is I, bit by bit, in tiny little increments, I lend my agency to them.
Yes.
How much of it they can accept and sort of internalize and take, and then help them grow more agency. Well, it's a very slow process, but it could be that, in fact, that's some of what we do with our sister. This stuff is just so, it's just so hard. It's so difficult, but
it is. And you're right. And I hope I'm not presenting my ideas in a hubristic way. We should approach them with humility and proper humility. And I'm trying to formulate non-theism as, properly exploratory in this way that we're doing here, and as a provocation to reflection and dialogue, and trying to break out of the sterile straitjackets that we find ourselves in. And I've been finding this conversation extremely helpful, both philosophically and personally, because these issues that I'm talking about, and I'm like, these issues, they stand on the border between impersonal philosophical reflection and personal involvement in transformation, and properly so. I mean, that's where they should be placed. And so I'm wrestling with this, and I see that you are too. And we both have loyalties we don't want to trespass against, and we're respecting that in each other. But yeah, I like the combination of the profundity of this and the humility that we have to bring to us. I think we can agree that's largely missing from a lot of the public debate between theism and atheism on both sides. That's something I would want to say.
Absolutely. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. There's a weird, so obviously in Christian theology, there's very binary language about Christian and not Christian. Okay. You've certainly got that language. And I don't mean to displace that or undermine that. That's one thing in Christianity, but Christianity also flips the other way. When Jesus says of the centurion, surely I've not found anyone with such faith in Israel.
Yes.
It's a minor miracle that he wasn't stoned at that moment, given the political religious context he was in.
Of course.
And so there's all these tensions that, so in my own Dutch Calvinist tradition, there's two big things that came out of Abram Kuyper in the Netherlands. He was this Dutch polymath at the beginning of the 20th century. One was common grace, and the other was the antithesis. And the antithesis is actually black, white, light, dark. It's the binary. And then common grace is, this God sends his grace upon everyone in the world. And well, how can you have a system that has these two things together? Well, it's really hard, but the truth is there's lots of these systems that we all live with and don't do without. And so I find in the Christian faith both language that says, I mean, I'm a Calvinist for Pete's sake, language that says I was chosen by God from the foundation of the earth, completely apart from any works that I might do. On the other hand, this God's radical generosity, that same message says, you didn't do a darn thing and he loves you regardless. Right. And he is drawing you and transforming you and taking you to himself. and he will not be frustrated by any power on earth. And, you know, all that absolutism is like, oh gosh. Then you watch Calvinists and, you know, they don't act like it's all cut and dried. They're playing all you stupid human games anyway. So so, you know, many of these things, many of these things I think we will continue to bump up against, struggle with. But, you know, what I'm so encouraged by you, John, and by, you know, what we found in this little corner on the internet, you know, I didn't know we could do this.
Yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I borrowed a word from Christianity, to try and remind people of this, the notion of fellowship, which is not friendship, and is not partnership, and is not family. Fellowship, and the necessity of bringing back the recognition of the importance of fellowship for proper human life and development. And so the fact that dialogos can occur in fellowship between people who will all, you know, you and I don't come to some final agreement. We come to some things we agree on. You give some ground, I give some ground, but there's things we won't let go of.
Yep.
And that's the way it should be. I mean,
yep.
And that's what I meant earlier when I said I wasn't trying to win an argument with you. I was really wanting to hear what you had to say about this, knowing that I probably wouldn't fully agree with it, but knowing also that you because you are outside of my position, you have the ability to pull me in a direction I couldn't go on my own. And I value that. I love it. I appreciate it profoundly. And so, yeah, the fact that this is occurring, and the fact that it's occurring more and more in this corner of the internet. And you know, Savella we should all be paying her royalties for that phrase, by the way.
Yes.
This is just really profound for me. I should get going soon, but
yeah.
I just wanted to thank you and for this. I mean, you afforded me trying to make very clear what I mean by non-theism and why it shouldn't be seen as just a sort of weak atheism. It's something other, and I'm trying to point that out. I'm trying to point out at least the potential dialogical value it has, and you seem to be acknowledging that at certain parts in the conversation, I think sincerely, and so I just wanted to thank you for that, because I wanted to try and get clear what my motivation is and what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to talk about with this language, and who I want other people to read and think about. And I wanted to take the opportunity to admit a mistake I had made. I named the thing I was, you know, opposing to atheism, classical theism, and sorry, the thing I was opposing to non-theism as classical theism, and that's a mistake. That's clearly a mistake, and I wanted to explore what making amends for that mistake would look like, and you've helped me to do that a lot, and I really appreciate that.
Well, I again, I'm super appreciative, John, for what you've done and but especially who you are, because you're in each of our stories. People who watch this will connect to us, and you know, I know that you have helped a lot of people break out of some things and experience some transformations and continue on in the conversation. And you know, I see part of what we're doing as the continuation of civilization. I mean, we're taking these ancient conversations and they're being revivified. They're alive again amongst us, and influenced by kind of Plato and Spinoza and John Calvin and Abram Kuyper and, you know, Vervaeke and van der Klee. And I feel tremendous gratitude for being able to participate in this. It's wonderful.
Me too. Thank you very, very much.
I will end the recording now, and I will send you this video, and I'll probably post mine tomorrow morning.
And I'll post mine probably sometime soon too. So again, thank you very much, Paul. I mean, beyond the intellectual discussion, the fellowship was much appreciated.
I agree. Amen. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.